just didn't feel like they believed me. I just felt like they somewhat thought it was my fault. I was in a bad enough place as it was. I kind of just needed a bit of care from their point of view, to be honest.
One woman's story, but a story so many others could tell. Jane, we're not using her real name, says a night out drinking with friends ended up with her being raped by a stranger. The next day, she went straight to the police.
They were very focused on the lead up to it and the fact that I was out drinking and the bars that I went into. And I couldn't remember a bar that I went into. And they said that made my account invalid. At that point as well, they said that when they'd interviewed the suspect, he said he didn't do it. Why that would influence their decision to not take it any further, of course he's going to say that.
For 2.5 years, she fought to get the police to refer the case for prosecution. In the end, she says she couldn't fight any longer. Today's report is the latest in a series of damning assessments of how the criminal justice system is failing survivors of rape and sexual violence. It says too often the Crown Prosecution Service and the police spend time finger-pointing and blaming each other for low conviction rates, with the victims caught in the middle and denied justice. And like many reports before it, it says now is the time for urgent change. The Joint Inspectorate report describes a vicious cycle where concern about low conviction rates results in a more cautious approach, leading to fewer prosecutions. And a disproportionate focus on victim credibility and a general lack of empathy from police and prosecutors sees too many women give up. You're open now, and you've kept open broadly throughout, have you?
Yes, we operated a full service from, all the way through the pandemic. It's been really important to us that women know that we're open and we're here for them.
And it's here on the front line where they must pick up the pieces. Waiting lists for help have almost tripled in the past year.
We've still got a long way to go, that's for sure. There's hundreds upon thousands of people, survivors of sexual violence, and women we know disproportionately affected. The delays in the criminal justice system are just far too long, exacerbated by COVID.
And the fact that the criminal justice system does take so long for women who've been victims and survivors of sexual violence, how does that impact their lives?
Women are left with the trauma that they've experienced and the knock-on effect it has on their lives, and their ability to hold down a job, hold down a relationship, the mental health exacerbating, and kind of just feeling that they're not being taken seriously.
Today's report acknowledges conviction rates will not improve overnight, but it's clear there are fundamental changes which can happen right away to stop women who've been raped feeling as much a victim of the system as a victim of the crime itself.
Actual aftermath and the police investigating it was worse than what happened. I don't want other girls to go through what I had to go through with it.
If a friend came to you now and said she'd been raped, would you tell her to go to the police?
No. No.
The Crown Prosecution Service and the police said they're working much more closely together to increase the number of cases being taken to court and the number of offenders being sent to prison to achieve the justice victims of these horrific crimes deserve. Well, before we came on air, I was able to speak to the report's author, Wendy Williams, who is Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. I began by asking her what she thinks makes this report any different from all the other reports over the years.
There have been a number of reviews that have been done over the past 2 decades, and some of the themes that have come through are very, very consistent. I think what perhaps draws our review apart from others is that we had the benefit of speaking to victims themselves and getting those first-hand accounts.
But as you say, we have heard over the last 2 decades, various reports suggest now is the time, and yet we're seeing the lowest conviction rate since records began, despite reports almost doubling in 4 years. So what is still going wrong?
We talk about a vicious cycle, and the cycle starts off with concern about low conviction rates. That then leads to a more cautious approach when it comes to prosecuting rape cases as compared to other types of cases, and that in turn can contribute to quite significant delays and to victims feeling that they themselves are the focus of investigations rather than the perpetrators. That leads to many victims withdrawing support for the case and in turn leads to lower conviction rates. So we're saying that cycle has got to be broken.
And all of that leads, the Victims Commissioner Vera Baird said last year, to rape effectively being decriminalised, that sexual predators act with impunity because they know they are so unlikely to be prosecuted. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's important to build on the strengths that we saw. We came across throughout the inspection many dedicated professionals, both officers and prosecutors, but too often we identified the need for prosecutors and officers to work together much more effectively. And we've called for a culture shift in the approach to cases so that victims of rape are fully supported, they have their specific needs supported, which in turn supports them to support cases and can lead to a virtuous circle rather than a vicious cycle.
But that question of culture is really important, isn't it? Because nobody is disputing that these are difficult crimes to prosecute. But what should not be difficult is that women who report rape to the police should be treated with dignity and with empathy. And the fact that in your official report you have to remind police and prosecutors to do that is really damning, isn't it?
So we are calling for police and prosecutors to put the blame to one side, to work together collaboratively to advance the best interests of victims and to concentrate on building strong cases.
You said in the report the police and CPS resources cannot meet the demand. Workloads are often high and unmanageable. Would you like to see a bigger financial commitment from government to those two organisations?
It can't be denied that specialist prosecutors and specialist police officers do provide a better service because they understand the specific needs of victims. But you can have all the resources in the world. If there isn't that fundamental shift in the mindset, then there won't be the step change in performance that's required.
And just finally, we asked the young woman in the film who'd had a terribly bruising experience, you know, if a friend came to you and said they'd been raped, would you advise them to report it to the police? And straight away she said no. And that's really worrying, isn't it?
I think it's such a shame because if victims don't come forward and make those reports, there's the risk that serious offenders will escape justice. So we are recommending that prosecutors and investigators work with victims, address their needs, address the delays, address the issues that we've identified, and do it as a matter of urgency because this is an imperative.
Wendy Williams, thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you.
And our requests for interviews with the CPS, the National Police Chiefs Council and the Government Minister were all declined.